Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Tribe of Unicorns. I'm your host Kendra, and today I'm talking with Bryan. She is the bold leader of One Girl Revolution podcast. I want you guys to listen into this one. It is such a good episode. We are talking about women, the power of telling our stories, and how one small act can cause a major ripple effect. So grab a cup of coffee, let's go. Hey, Kate, how are you? Welcome to Tribe of Unicorns.
Thanks so much for having me, Kendra. I'm really excited to be here and I'm doing great. It's a beautiful day in Detroit and I'm excited to be spending time with you.
Well, I am so psyched to have you here. Kate, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do, and we can talk about how we met and how I found you and how I'm so inspired by you.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I'm so inspired by you and I'm so excited to be a part of the unicorn community now.
You're a unicorn.
And yay. My name's Bryan. I'm from Detroit, Michigan originally. And I had kind of moved around, like in college. I went to school in Ohio and then went and did a master's degree in Dublin, Ireland. So I got to live in Ireland for a couple of years.
Oh,
People always think it's like so magical, and it is, but it's totally different actually living there.
I'm sure.
And then moved back to the States and moved to Washington, D.C. and lived there for almost 7 years and worked in PR and media. And then about 2 years ago, I moved back to Michigan and was trying to figure out, I think, the story of so many of our lives, where we have these chapters where we're trying to figure out exactly what we're supposed to be doing. Like I felt like an 18-year-old, when you're trying to figure out where you're going to go to college and what you're going to study. I felt like that. And so I moved back to Detroit, didn't really know if I was going to continue in PR or if I was going to move on to something else. And I picked up this book about the city of Detroit because I was like, I'm moving back. I need to refine my roots. And Detroit's flag has 2 phrases on it that I absolutely love. I want to just like put them all over my apartment because I just feel like they're the embodiment of all of us and all of our stories. But I'm reading this book and it's talking about Detroit's flag and the 2 phrases. And the 2 phrases are, we hope for better things and it will rise from the ashes, meaning Detroit. So Detroit has come through so much. Anybody who's listening knows so much about the riots and other things that have gone on in Detroit. But Detroit always rises from the ashes, which is all of our stories. There's always hope and it will rise from the ashes. And the moment that I read those 2 phrases, Kendra, I knew what I was supposed to do. And I wanted to create this platform for women's voices and their stories to be heard. And so I started One Girl Revolution. It's a podcast and social platform that highlights the stories of everyday women who are changing the world through their lives in all different types of ways. So my PR background has come in really handy with that. But yeah, it's been a crazy journey over 2 years, but I've interviewed over 100 women, all different backgrounds, all different ages, and we're just continuing to grow and evolve. So
we were talking about that earlier. The excuse that a podcast gives you to connect with people. Can you speak on that a little bit? I mean, who are some of the people that you've met and either, would have never had that conversation in real life otherwise?
Yeah, I think that, we were talking about just how many people we're able to reach out to, even across the country or even around the world now, that podcasts can reach out to people that you would want to have coffee with, right? Like celebrities or just people that you see their story. That's how, One Girl is all about everyday stories. So it doesn't have to be, a celebrity or anybody like big and famous that's on the podcast, but podcasts have really given us an opportunity to almost like we're doing right now, where you can have coffee with somebody and hear their story. And that's why I love listening to podcasts too, because it's so story driven and you just feel like you're getting to know people in a really authentic way.
Yeah.
I've interviewed, like I said, over 100 women and girls. So even like the youngest I've interviewed is 5 years old. The oldest I think is probably 75. I'm looking for like a really cool granny story, like a granny who's like in her 80s that's like helping people experiencing homelessness or something. So if anybody's listening and they know that story, but I've just found all these different stories. Sometimes I'll see something on Facebook that inspires me, and usually it's a cold call, email, or message. And I just say, hey, I'd love to have you on the podcast. So one of the coolest ones was I used to always watch Rehab Addict, the show on HGTV. And I was really inspired by Nicole Curtis, and she's a Detroit girl and does a lot of work here. And so I reached out to her assistant and she did the podcast. So that was really cool. But I think all the stories are they've all touched me in a different way. And sometimes the stories surprise me. And I think that's all of us too. It's like, sometimes you think that you know who this person is, or you put them in a box. And I just love having conversations with people and hearing about their stories and hearing about the things that nobody else knows about them.
Yeah. How did you go from not really knowing what your direction was to having a podcast with 100 guests? What was that journey?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, when I started the podcast, I had no idea how to do a podcast. I had done a lot of PR and media, but never had done it myself.
Yeah.
So I was always pitching people to do stories, but never actually doing the interviews myself. And I started out I found a podcast studio in Detroit, and I was like, I don't know how to edit. I don't know how to do anything. I don't even know how do I get this podcast up on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And so I reached out to this podcast studio and started there. So I did the first 10 episodes at a podcast studio here in Detroit. And then I started realizing that I could just do it on my own, do it like Zoom, like we are now. And it gave me a lot more flexibility. Then I started traveling. So whenever I would go, I started doing PR work. So all along, I've always done PR work to pay my bills. And while I've been growing this platform, and whenever I would go on a trip for PR or media, or even just going to visit friends, different places, I went out to California to visit a couple of friends. I would look up in my Google Doc that I would keep all these inspiring stories, and I'd find out who was there. And then I'd reach out to them and see if we could meet in person. So a lot of the women that I've covered on the podcast, I've gotten to meet in person, which has been really cool and really special. And sometimes even serving with them. So if they run an organization, getting to go and work with them for a day. But yeah, I've been to California, Texas, New York City. I was in New York City for a little bit. So it's just continued to grow. And I think my story really is one of, which is so many people, I sort of stepped into it blindly. I just had this idea. And even when I started it, I didn't really listen to podcasts. And I know that podcasts continue to grow and more people are starting to listen to them. So I don't think we've even reached the height of podcasting, but it just was like putting one foot in front of the other. And I'd have different times where I'd sort of run out of, or I would think I was running out of stories. And then all of a sudden I'd find this flood of stories, and there's so many stories out there and so many cool guests. So it just has continued to grow. And I, most of the time, still don't feel like I know anything about what I'm doing, but I'm just putting one foot in front of the other. And I'm just open to wherever it goes from here.
Why do you think it's so important to tell women's stories?
That's a great question. I felt like coming from DC, and that's a big part of even why I started One Girl Revolution with that direction. And every once in a while, I'll get somebody who are like, well, why don't you tell everybody's story? And it's like, well, I'm a woman and I know that realm. And working in PR and working in media, I found so often, especially living in DC, that women's stories were often political. So there was always a political angle to something, or they were very divisive, the stories that I was reading about women, or even things that I was watching on TV. And I don't think that that is the best way for our world to function. We all know, especially over the past year with COVID, that we are so much stronger together. No matter who you are, no matter where you're from, no matter what your skin color is, no matter what your zip code is, no matter what you've come through, no matter what you're going through, every single one of us, we are stronger together, and we all have a purpose. I believe that we all have a unique mission, a unique purpose. We are as unique as our fingerprints. But coming from DC and coming from PR and media, I felt like there were so many stories of women and girls that were either being overlooked or completely, like, women were being segregated and separated. And so I wanted to create this space where I didn't put women in boxes. besides the fact that they are women or girls, but just gave them the space to tell their authentic stories and didn't edit stories to make them have a particular angle, but just gave them the authentic space, which that's what I love so much about podcasts. But yeah, I hope at some point other people jump in and start podcasts like this. I don't think that I have to be the person to tell every single story. But I wanted to elevate women and their voices. And I think that there need to be more spaces for women to tell their stories and use their voices and the power of our stories to impact the world and to help others.
Yeah. What has the feedback been
about the podcast and like the platform
like
in
do you
general?
get people saying like, wow, that really changed how I feel about this or changed my life?
Yeah, it's amazing to me because so many of the women that I've had on the podcast have either never told their story before, or they've never had this just very open space for them to tell their story in the way that they want to tell it. And obviously I'm asking them questions and helping lead the conversation. And there are things that I ask specifically for One Girl Revolution guests, but I think that it's given these women, it's inspired them to be even more authentically themselves and to look at themselves and say, wow, I never thought that what I was doing mattered. I just was doing it because it was the right thing to do. That's my favorite thing, is a lot of times I'll ask women why they do what they do. Women and girls, why are you doing this organization? Why did you start this organization? Or why are you, just helping your neighbor, doing the little things? Because it's a whole spectrum. Some things are really big where they founded a business or organization that's helping others, or sometimes it's little where they're just helping their neighbor or doing something good. But it's instilled something within these women and like a courage and I think an excitement to do even more, and validated what they do and their power. But then I get messages all the time and emails from people all the time where they're like, oh, this opened my eyes to a topic, or this opened my eyes to something that someone else has gone through, or I can relate to that. I went through that too. And I don't know anyone who has, survived human trafficking or survived abuse, because some of the topics are really hard and difficult things that women have come through. But I think it's created this community where we all see one another as human beings and support one another. It's been cool to connect some of the One Girl Revolutions, the stories, with one another. So maybe they didn't know anything about a particular topic, but they were interested. And so I'm able to connect a lot of the women that I've had on the podcast. But then outside of that, where it's gotten so many people that listen to the podcast, it's gotten them involved or gotten them to support a cause that they didn't even know existed. So it's just, it's been a really cool space to be.
I know you were interviewed on GMA.
Yes. Good Morning America. That's like the craziest thing of all time, Kendra. I still can't believe that it happened. And I tell the story that when COVID first hit, I think all of us remember, it will probably always be a story in our lives, a chapter in our lives where we will remember exactly where we were when the world shut down.
Yeah.
Exactly what we were thinking, exactly what our stresses were. I think so many people were like, do I have water? Do I have toilet paper? Do I have do I have enough food? There was so much fear right off the bat, but first thing I thought was that. Second thing I thought was, what is One Girl Revolution's role in this?
Yeah.
And
that's what I loved. When I heard that, I was like, yes, because I went through the same process of, oh my God, is this real life? And then I thought, how can I help?
Yeah. And that's, I loved seeing those stories, because I think there were so many more than we even know about of people who did that. Because I think all of us had that element in our lives, no matter how scared we were, no matter how nervous we were, how uncertain, there still is so much uncertainty, how things are going to open up, when they're going to open up. And so that moment happened and I was like, well, I want to keep telling stories of women. And so I started looking for stories of women and girls that were doing interesting things or inspiring things during COVID, and feeding those in need, who were running errands or like helping people with groceries, all these different ways that people stepped in, supporting healthcare workers and essential workers, doing kind things for grocery store workers. Like we would not have been fed if it wasn't for grocery store workers. Like they are incredible and putting themselves in danger during that time. And so I created 15 ways, One Girl Revolution created 15 ways to help others during COVID. And then I literally saw an email address on Facebook, on Good Morning America's Facebook page. And I was like, I have nothing to lose. I'm going to email them. And worst case scenario, they never write me back. Second worst case scenario, which is actually a great one, is one of the stories that we've covered on One Girl is inspiring to them and they decide to do an entire feature on them. Never in a million years did I ever think that Good Morning America would call and be like, hey, we want to do a feature on the podcast and the platform. But a year later, it was an entire year later, here we are, a year after COVID, they called and they were like, we want to do this feature. And it ended up running during Women's History Month, which was really cool. But
I think that's where I saw it originally. And that's how I saw you. And then I started listening to the podcast and reached out because I just thought, wow, this is somebody that her story needs to be heard too. Because you tell other people's stories, but what's your story?
Yeah. Thanks so much, Kendra. No, thank you for having me. And like, thank you for listening. And that's it, is we need to do more of that in this world. We need to listen to other people's stories. And I think that there's a lot to be said about the power of stories. I'm Irish, so I like love storytelling, grew up in a family where everybody was telling stories all the time. But I've really come through the podcast to see like, how can we move beyond something that's happened to us or something that we've experienced? And I know you have so many of your own stories with that, and I do too, and everybody does. But how can you move beyond something? How can you overcome something? How can you rise from the ashes, like Detroit's flag says, if you don't know how to talk about it and if no one's listening to you? So many of the issues that we have in the world, we aren't listening. We are not listening. We are not seeing people. And so I think that's the power of One Girl. I think that's the power of what you're doing. It's elevating people's stories and their voices, but helping us all find our own space to heal and move beyond things that we've experienced.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people don't even know what direction to turn. So when there are unicorns out there and they can look to them for inspiration, that helps people kind of find their true north so they can move forward.
Right. Empowered women empower women, as they say. But I think that's all people. If someone is empowered, if their voice is empowered, it empowers other people. It inspires other people.
Well, I love your particular topic because it, I think you had said or maybe it was in that interview, the power of one. Mm-hmm. And I've always thought that, my goal every day is to make one random person smile and think about that ripple effect of how maybe, that just made them smile and then they smiled at somebody else because now they just lifted their whole mood. I think a lot of people think to give back or to serve, you need to do something epically huge. And you need lots of people in this big organ, but just it's the power of one.
Yeah, I love your daily routine of that, like just trying to make somebody smile or just help somebody feel seen. Yeah. I think so many people in the world just feel invisible, and we've all had those moments ourselves, but helping people feel seen or heard. And that's it. It's the power of one. I think when I first started thinking about the power of one, I always think in like a really big way. Like you have to start a business, you have to start an organization, you have to start a movement. And that's what our world kind of teaches us to, like, you only matter if you have the power of one relies on how many people you have following you on Instagram. But I've come to know, like through One Girl and through all these different stories, the power of one is really with us, and just the little things can have just as much of a ripple effect as something really big. Like you said, a smile, if you smile at somebody, they're definitely going to go and smile at another person, or it might brighten their day, or they might be going through something really difficult. Yeah. And you might have started a ripple effect that changes the way that they treat their coworkers, the way they treat their whatever person at the gas station, the way they treat their kids. And so we have the power, and I think we need to refocus ourselves on those little things, because those matter just as much, if not more so, than the big things.
I know. If somebody's so concerned with their Instagram account and, oh, well, I'm not going to do this because I'm not going to reach the right amount of people. If you just change and impact one person's life, like that's huge. My grandfather, and it's like one of the coolest stories I've ever heard in my personal life. When he passed away, He was always like very sweet and giving, and he ran a business and gave back to the community for years and years, but never really like wanted to publicize anything, or, newspapers would like pick up, a local story and he'd be like, okay, whatever. So he passed away, and I can't tell you we had a family call, and it was a couple weeks after, and they were like, Tom never came by with our groceries this week. We were just wondering if everything was okay. And he had been feeding this family for years and never told anybody. And it was just like
Wow.
something he was like, I can do this. And he never wanted to be anyone to know. It was just like, I'm going to help them because I can. And nobody needs to know about it. It's not an ego thing. And I always have that in the back of my head. Like, if I'm going to help someone, it's because I want to help, and, not because I want to be seen.
Right. Right. And that, I think that's most people, Kendra. Like, there are always going to be the people that want to be really big and flashy and seen by everyone, but the majority of us just want to live our lives, and we want to make some sort of impact and
Yeah.
do good and leave a legacy behind. I mean, what a legacy that your grandfather left behind just in that simple gesture.
Yeah.
And I think that I was talking to a friend yesterday just about that word, legacy, and how I don't think that women are often taught. Men kind of are, I guess, because they think more about, like, their business
Right. A
credentials
financial
and where they're moving.
legacy.
Yeah, financial legacy. But women, we're not taught, not all, there are definitely exceptions to this, but I don't feel like we are taught to see our legacy of like what we're leaving behind. And that doesn't mean like that you have to write a book. That doesn't mean that you have to have X number of followers on social media, but just the people like your grandfather, like that touched people's lives. We all have that power.
Yeah. I wanted to just tell you guys real quick that we are officially sponsored by Embodyme. Embodyme is a one-stop shop virtual wellness studio for busy people like myself and yourself. The coolest thing I like about Embodyme is that it is a live stream yoga, fitness, meditation, breath work, EFT tapping, moon ceremonies, intuitive dance, really kind of all in one place. And the instructors on Embodyme are just top notch, the sweetest, most educated. I've had the best experiences working with them, and it's not like one of those things where it's one-sided. They can see you, you interact, they support you through everything. It's been an absolutely incredible experience, and I love that I can fit it in between podcast episodes or client meetings. And the platform itself, the functionality is really spectacular. So Amber is actually the founder of Embodyme. She's one of our unicorns, and if you haven't heard that episode yet, I will link the episode in the show notes, so definitely check that out. But right now, the Tribe audience, if you want to give it a shot, you would get a free 7-day trial and 20% off on your first month by using code unicorns. So sign up at embodyme.live, and again, I'll have the link in the show notes so you can check it out and let me know what you think. I want to know what your favorite class has been that you've taken. So far for me, my somatic yoga experience was a somatic movement, I believe it was called. That was the best. So check out embodyme.live and let me know what you think. All right. So we talked about COVID. I loved that. When I saw that, I was like, because I think so many people had the same reaction. Like, yes, it's scary and horrible, but there's a huge group of people that were like, what can we do to fix this? What can we do to give back? The only thing I could think of, I started giving business advice to get online quick.
Great.
And I started doing creative prompts. So
that's awesome.
It was so much fun. We just had draw your hand or photograph your hand, somehow creatively capture your hand and share it in this little Facebook group and stuff like that. It was cute.
But that's awesome.
It was amazing.
That's it. Kendra, like it all comes down to like us, stick with your strengths, know what you're good at. We don't have to, I mean, even like the podcast, it's like, I knew some things, right? Like I knew how to tell a story. I knew how to prep people. I knew how to ask questions, but I didn't know how to do the rest of that. But I figured it out. And so I think you like start with what your strengths are. And I think even during COVID, I loved seeing people that were just like, okay, this is my life and this is my space. I'm good at business or I'm good at social media. How can I help other people in that way? You know, it's
Yeah.
not everybody has to go and volunteer at a soup kitchen. Not
Right.
everybody needs to go and whatever, buy groceries for people in need. Sometimes it's just doing what you can, what you know how to do, and sharing your gifts and talents with other people. And that can make a massive impact too. Like I love in Detroit, there's this like attitude of creatives
Hmm.
helping and supporting nonprofits because a lot of them don't have money to like hire somebody to
Right.
help them with PR strategy or online strategies or social media or whatever. But you have creatives that are like offering their services, and that can be just as important, maybe more so, to get the word
Yeah.
out.
We had, I mean, just in my neighborhood, we had somebody jump on. I know it was like an Instagram thing where people were putting rainbows in their windows, and then we were taking pictures of them as we take our walks. We did like all different themes. We started painting rocks and leaving them all over the neighborhood with like little
Aw,
motivational phrases on them and stuff.
I
So even
love
like
that.
super locally, it was just beautiful to watch the whole neighborhood come together and
Mm.
get each other through it. It was
Yeah.
really cool. A lot of people giving groceries, toilet paper.
That kind of stuff matters so much. And I think I'm always going to look back at COVID and think about those instances. And, you know, the postman who's walking by and putting like people's mail in their mailboxes and seeing those rainbows. Like, I loved
Yeah.
that. I thought that was so beautiful. Or like different messages of hope. Like, we're going to get through this together.
Yeah.
That just can brighten someone's day.
I felt the same way about the time period around 9/11. Um, the way we pulled together as a people and like just we were on a level playing field and everyone just reached out and loved each other. I was living in Philadelphia at the time, and it was just it felt like we were all one community, whatever color, whatever race, sex, whatever age, it didn't matter. Like
Mhm.
everybody was just consoling and supporting each other. And I felt the same way with this. We were all just, we're all going to get through this together.
Yeah. And we need more of that in our world. Things are so divisive. And, you know, especially in election years, I think that, not to get into politics, but it's like there's so much division in our
Yeah.
world. And it's just so powerful when people bond together.
Right. Because you know what? At the end of the day, whoever the leading Democrat and Republican are at the time really don't matter in the long
Mhm.
run, right? It's
Mhm.
this community and this connection that we make with people, not a not a political party. So, like, if
Right.
we can just keep listening to each other and keeping open minds and connecting on like a real way, then the rest of that crap goes away.
I totally agree with you.
So, all right, what advice do you have for the people that are like, I want to do this, but who am I? Who am I to start
Mm.
this? Why, how could I do this?
Yeah. The why me, the why me
Yes, that's what I
complex.
wrote. Why me?
I think so I believe that everybody is, like I said, put here for a reason and put here for a purpose. And sometimes your purpose is really big. You're supposed to start an organization or a podcast or write a book or, you know, whatever the big thing you could think of, imagine and dream for. But sometimes it's just to be us. Sometimes it's just to be a person in the lives of all our the people around us, our friends and our family. And so I just would encourage everybody who's listening to know, to find out. And it's a journey, and I feel like it's an evolving journey, because even in different chapters of our lives, that's going to change. If you're a mom who's at home with her kids, like, you might not have a lot of time on your hands to start something like that, start whatever project is on your heart. But I think that there's a reason why things are often put on our heart, or dreams in our mind that we want to accomplish, or things we want to chase, dreams we want to chase. So I would honor that. And I often tell this story about Sarah Blakely. I love her. She's the founder of Spanx.
Hmm.
So every single woman, and now I think they're starting to do men's stuff too. So more and more people are learning about Spanx, but she obviously is this amazing businesswoman. But she would always talk about how she always, and still to this day, she always carries a notebook.
Hmm.
And she would write down ideas she had. She would write down quotes that inspired her. And even if she was like, even if none of these things come true, I at least like wrote them down and I at least have them somewhere. And those are going to be a part of my legacy, even if they never become anything. And she started that before she founded Spanx. And I think about that a lot. I think that sometimes there are things that are put on our heart or in our mind because maybe it's not our project. Maybe the timing isn't right, or maybe we don't have the money or whatever the hang up is. But maybe that's something that we're just supposed to put out into the universe, and somebody else might come across our path that might be looking for an idea and they might take it and run with it.
The perfect person.
Right. Or maybe somebody will come, a friend will come to you and be like, I was thinking I wanted to start this thing. And you can be like, oh my gosh, like me too. Let's do it together. So I just would say anybody who's listening, believe in yourself that you can do it, and honor that voice or whatever you want to say that's encouraging you to chase some dream. There's a reason for it. And don't be afraid. I love Joan of Arc. There's this great quote from her that says, I was born to do this. I am not afraid. I was born to do this. And I have thought about that so much over the past year. And I think so many people have been afraid of so many different things. You're watching, for me, like clients going away and like, everybody was worried about money and financially, like, were we all going to be able to survive? And then I'm trying to run this podcast and I'm like, who am I? Like, why do I have to be the one? Like, why can't somebody else do this? Anybody else wants to do it? No, nobody wants to do it. And so there's so many instances, and it can be this like negative, why not me? But then I think you can flip it and be like, why not me? Like, I have these gifts and talents, and to fight that negativity in our lives, we need to fight against that. And so just start small. Like I said, I started the podcast with no experience in podcasting whatsoever. And I still feel like every day I'm learning something new. I just learned how to put the podcast up on YouTube, which I felt like
me too,
an absolute champion. I felt like a champion doing it. And so I have not mastered TikTok. That's something one day maybe. So there's just a million things. Like the reality is like none of us know anything about what we're doing.
Yeah.
But I just would encourage everybody who's listening, if you have a hope or a dream or whatever, start it. And like worst case scenario, when I started One Girl, I was like, worst case scenario, I do a couple episodes and it never goes anywhere, but it gave a couple women space to speak. And then it's just continued to grow because I just have like literally put one foot in front of the other.
Yeah. I love that. And you pick something that you kind of enjoy doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that's a big part of it is don't do something that's that you think about and it makes you stressed, or do something that, and I'm sure not to say that it's not a stressful thing to do this, but do something that, kind of brings you joy.
Right. And the reality is everything's going to be work a little bit. You can't just even just to survive is a lot of work. You think about all the different, like just to feed yourself some days. It's like, how do I do that? So, no matter what, like it's going to be work, but we all need outlets. We all need, whether you're a creative person or maybe you just love to read, like maybe that's your thing. You just love to read, creating that space for yourself to actually just do the thing that brings you joy. Or if your thing is to teach other people, volunteer at a local community center and teach some random class like painting, or I don't know, whatever if you're into literature, you teach a literature class. Gardening. There's so many needs in this world. And so we can all do something. And when you give to other people, this is another thing that I've learned so much about. Like so many of the women that I've interviewed, they were like, I had no direction, or I didn't know what my like hopes and dreams even were. There are so many stories that I could point back to that were those kind of stories. And I would even point to my own story. Like I moved back to Detroit and I had no idea what I was going to do. But then when you start doing anything for any other person, it almost becomes clear. It's like, oh my gosh, this is what I was born to do. Oh my gosh, like this is why I went through, like you and I were talking before we started recording, like sometimes you have to go through something in order to help other people, or to elevate other people's voices. And so if you're struggling and you don't know what to do or how to do it or how to make a difference, find opportunities to serve other people, and it will give you your purpose.
Yeah, I love that. Well, where can people connect with you and find you?
Yeah, so people can check out One Girl Revolution. So you can go to onegirlrevolution.com. We are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at One Girl Revo. So the number One Girl REVO. We're on YouTube. You can see the Good Morning America spot there. We have a short documentary that people can check out too, featuring the voices and stories of incarcerated women at Cook County Jail. There's a lot. So, but if you go to the One Girl Revolution website, you can find everything there. And then of course the podcast is up on everywhere that you listen to podcasts. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all that. And you can just check it out at One Girl Revolution.
And we'll have all your links in the show notes and on your unicorn page. So
Yay.
people will be able to find you no matter what.
Awesome. Kendra,
Okay,
thank you so much. No, thank you for having me. This is such an honor to be a part of the unicorn family and now to be a unicorn myself.
Yay. Thank you so much for coming on the episode, Kate. You are just such a fantastic, amazing One Girl Revolution all on your own. And guys, you can change the world with just a smile. Go try it out. What was your biggest takeaway from this episode? I want to hear how you are planning on changing the world and supporting women in your community, telling people's stories, listening to people's stories. What are you going to do? How are you taking this on? How are you going to be your own One Girl Revolution? Let me know what you think. Don't forget to connect with Kate at onegirlrevolution.com. And that's the number one girlrevolution.com. It's a really fantastic podcast. I think you guys are going to love it.